Well, hello everybody. It is Cantus. I'm back with another video for you guys, and I hope it finds you all well. So today I wanted to go through some various footnotes in the memoirs of Billy Shears to highlight the topic of PAULISM. And I just kind of want to go over like the basic tenets of PAULISM, I guess, and how it is basically another sort of Luciferian cult, if you will. So I think we can kind of start off with a definition of Luciferianism, being that it's a belief system that venerates the essential characteristics that are affixed to Lucifer. So, Lucifer has had many, many different names throughout the years, different mythological and religious figures are associated with Lucifer, but it's also, Lucifer is associated with the planet Venus, and Venus is said to be the alter ego of the earth. It is a representation of the highest aspect of the human mind. Basically, that knowledge is turned into wisdom. And so Venus is also known as the morning star. And it can also be representative of Vesper, the evening star, just like Lucifer, the fallen angel, is said to be called the morning star. So Luciferianism, so Lucifer, that term, that name, comes from the Latin lucerne, which means light, and then fere, which is to bear. So you get light bearer in Lucifer from the Latin, bringer of the dawn, for the morning star, a symbol of enlightenment, independence, and human progression. Truth and freedom of will are principles taught so people can worship their inner self and potential. And again, knowledge is turned into wisdom. One of the biggest themes that come to my mind, after going over the scarab beetle and its significance and symbolism, that it symbolizes the morning god Capri, that Capri was the bringer of the sun, of the dawn, the god of the early morning sun, which is basically a morning star. It can be related back to that. And again, guys, the whole principle of Luciferianism involves accepting Lucifer's gift of wholeness. Remember, the one, getting rid of duality and just dwelling as one. So this kind of goes into the whole idea of this new world order that's on the horizon, right? If you think of what the word whole means. It means undivided or unbroken. And then wholeness is that we are all one with everything, right? And so that ties into monopsychism. That is the idea that we are all one soul and mind, or that there is one soul and mind for all men, that there is a global consciousness. And in order, people meditate and try to focus their attention on what's inside of them, on the God within, or whatever Godhead you'd like to worship, as long as it embodies the attributes of Lucifer. Okay, so let's turn to page 489 in the memoirs. And I just want to read, bear with me, I'm going to read through some of these footnotes. They're a little long, but they are valid. So let's look at the numerology. You have 4 plus 8 plus 9 equals 21. Then you get 2 plus 1 equals 3. And again, 3 is considered the perfect number. It's a number of harmony, of understanding. Remember, everything comes in threes. You're looking at like the past, the present, the future, birth, life, death, the beginning, the middle, the end. 3 is just, you can't have one without the other, right? Yeah, so let's take a look at what this footnote says. And let's actually look at the emboldened words at the top of the page. It says, "Do what thou wilt. I do not fret about consenting adults." All right. John Lennon says, "The whole Beatles idea was to do what you want, to take your own responsibility. Do what you want and try not to harm other people. Do what thou willst as long as it doesn't hurt somebody." "Do what thou wilt" is Aleister Crowley's most famous line and is a primary tenet of his Thelema religion, as well as of Luciferianism, generally with all of its many offshoots. Quote-unquote free will and quote-unquote free agency are buzzwords in some of these groups who hold the individual's will as sacred. By contrast, Jesus prays, "Father, not my will, but thine be done," in Luke chapter 22, verse 42. Of course, any quotes from Jesus were likely said for the benefit of those who comprehended neither Jesus nor themselves. Whether in full alignment with Source or identifying as Source, without the illusion of separation between what is God and what is each of us, it may be impossible to distinguish the will of one from another. When we are acting as our higher selves, our will is God's will. To do what thou wilt is to do God's will, when our own will is reflective of our own true infinite divine nature. With the Illuminati's doctrine of free agency, they have rules in place to obtain the consent of participants, lest some be esteemed as victims. In Paul's case, he made that quote-unquote pact with the devil, as some people call it, wherein he prayed that he would die for the band, if called to do so, to make his name and music immortal. It all seemed unreal to him then, a fantasy of greatness. However, that idea did not originate with him. Those assigned to recruit him romanticize the idea of living forever in the collective consciousness in exchange for shortening his life. Recruiters told the Beatles how to do the exchange for shortening his life. I'm sorry, I got confused there. Recruiters told the Beatles how to do the ritual and what to say. Upon doing so of his own free will and accord, it was reported back, making all that occurred thenceforth by Paul's consent. The idea of mutual consent also comes into play with disclosure. Although the global elite accomplish their design by clandestine means, they tell all in words so plain that the majority disbelieves them. According to their law, when one gives notice of a course of action, if the recipient of the notice does not formally object to it, then he or she has legally agreed. With that agreement, those who control the world do so according to the will of the people. Sometimes they lay out the truth so plainly that most people disbelieve it on the grounds that if it were true, the perpetrators would not admit it. However, with their idea of fair play, and according to their doctrine of free agency, they must tell, but are not required to convince anyone. The Beatles told fans of Paul's death all along, without anyone objecting in the prescribed manner. All tactically agreed. Once Sgt. Pepper's showed all that Billy Shears replaced Paul, who died. All who bought more albums with Billy as Paul demonstrated agreement that Billy is right where he belongs. After the clues were explained, all still voted for him by buying more albums. Wow. And that is definitely something that goes into the whole idea of greater and lesser magic, right? In order for a spell to work, they have to disclose some amount of truth, or, in ways of masterfully speaking, in encoded riddles and allegories and whatnot. It's and sometimes, just like the footnote said, they can just outwardly say it and people will not ever accept it. Okay, let's go to page 548, and this is in the chapter called PAULISM. So we're going to get into this. So let's look at the numerology of the page. You have 5 plus 4 plus 8 equals 17. 1 plus 7 equals 8. And 8 is the number that represents balance. It can represent infinity, and it represents spiritual perfection. It is a completeness of sorts. Let's look at the emboldened words. I direct our fans' energy to me. Paul's head is lost. Imagine being in a crowded room, feeling someone looking at you, sensing the direction of that energy source. You look up, already knowing exactly where the person is standing. Your eyes meet. You both smile and nod in confirmation. You caught him or her staring at you because we cannot focus on people without sending them energy. Now, imagine standing before an audience of 10,000 fans, brimming with elevated energy focused almost entirely on you. Imagine receiving all of that energy and still being able to function. Here's a tip. When more energy comes in than your emotions can handle, vent it out an open mouth to stop it from flowing out of the eyes as tears. Then direct that incoming energy either to the earth's core or to the sun. Direct the energy in, such as to your heart, if it's strong enough, and right out to where you intend it. Be a conduit, not a container. Containers burst. Next, imagine having sold billions of records that are played around the world, around the clock, at every moment of every day. Many, many, many people are hearing his songs, singing along, watching his videos, reading about him, talking about him, and thinking about him. Unwittingly, they are all sending energy to, quote unquote, Paul McCartney. That kind of constant energy requires frequent grounding. When you feel ungrounded, reconnect with your body and with the earth by exercising, holding your breath, walking barefoot on the ground, or by soaking in water. When we realize that everything is energy that impacts everything else on the planet, and that we send people energy all of the time without realizing it, we can learn to direct that energy intentionally. We can send it in a burst or as a steady flow. The burst depletes the sender unless replenishing. To replenish as we go while sending the energy to the person or thing we target, pull the energy in from the sun, air, or earth. Again, as the conduit, we can send the energy wherever we will. What does that sound like, guys? That's what I went over at the very beginning. It is everybody focusing their attention and their consciousness on something, directing that energy intentionally. It goes to feeding the myth, it goes to feeding the quote unquote Christ figure that was tried to be made of Paul in Paul's image. Okay, so let's go to the next page, actually, to 549. So with that numerology, 9 plus 9 equals 18, and then you get 1 plus 8 equals 9. 9 again is a number showing fulfillment or completion or spiritual enlightenment. All right, so let's look at the footnote here. In the encoder's notes, William refers to the red and blue sets as the House of Paul, with 13 songs per vinyl album, and the House of William, with 28 if you count the 2 vinyl records as one. Although in Masonry the red lodge outranks the blue, William switched the colors here to represent Paul's sacrifice and William's sky-high position and success. Oh, he's just a clever dude, isn't he? That Billy. Okay, so let us go to page 554 in the book. That numerology, 5 plus 5 plus 4 is 14. 1 plus 4 equals 5. 5 is a number of major change. It's a number of adaptability. It also can signal justice or truth. And note, too, the numerical sequence. Oh, wait, no. That's on the next page. Never mind. So again, we're looking at truth and justice with the number 5. Okay. Let's look at the emboldened words. John turned from Christianity. John became disillusioned, searching all over the world. All right. So before George Martin gave the Beatles their contract with EMI, he told them that the media would ensure their unparalleled success as long as the group remained useful in furthering certain global agendas. Among those agendas, the elite would use the band to overthrow Christianity in preparation for a quote-unquote more meaningful spirituality, accumulating in a one-world government's own one-world religion. John, Paul, and George, and later Ringo, were each asked if they were willing to publicly let go of their Christian heritage. Each agreed. They would become the most emulated people on the planet who no longer had any use for outmoded Christianity. In 1963, Paul was given these exact words to say as if his own. Christianity doesn't fit in with my life. The media, pretending to be shocked, widely publicized those words. By feigning outrage, the press could outrage the public sufficiently to have the offending line repeated until that hypnotic suggestion made its permanent impact. Yes, guys, and that is going back to the whole idea that they were created to bring forth this change, right? This change into the Aeon of Horus. Yeah. Okay, so then the next page, 555, this footnote. This numerology, like I was saying, it's 5 plus 5 is 5, is 15, 1 plus 5 is 6. 6 is a number that is a representation of unconditional love, of nurturing. It can be like empathy and hope. It's a number of the heart, basically. So let's look at the emboldened words on this page. Bob Dylan is not a religion, but philosophies have their quote-unquote God. Beatles included religion bashing. John says, I've been through Paul. That's when I've seen through junkies, I've been through it all. I've seen religion from Jesus to Paul. That lists the full history of John's experience with religion. It began with Jesus. As a young child, John was Anglican. And then eventually he changed his modus operandi on the Christianity front. Okay. Just kind of going in with that, though, the footnote on this page, the song God from John's first post-Beatles solo album lists his disbeliefs, accumulating in, quote-unquote, I don't believe in Beatles. In a Rolling Stone interview, he explained, Beatles was the final thing because I no longer believe in myth. And Beatles is another myth. Yes, they are mythological creatures just like Lucifer was, right? Ugh. Okay, so let's turn to page 557. I only have a few more to go through. That numerology, 5 plus 5 plus 7 is 17, 1 plus 7 is 8. Again, 8 is the number of balance, spiritual perfection, completeness. Goes very, very fitting with this footnote. The Beatles and others sought for Lord Krishna, not only in quote-unquote Paul, by literal soul transmigration, but also within themselves spiritually. George Harrison, most especially, took both very seriously. In his greatest post-Beatles hit, My Sweet Lord, in 1970, he expressed his yearning to connect with that Lord. It was something that he worked toward and nourished throughout the remainder of his life. George's spiritual focus is evident in much of his music. If the plan continues to be as successful as it has thus far, centuries from now and thenceforth, when people reverently discuss Vishnu's avatars who transformed the world, they will primarily speak of Krishna, Jesus, and Paul. Consider how little was written about Jesus in the early centuries of his Christian era, and by contrast, how much more quote-unquote Paul was already promoted globally even before his age of Aquarius began. The work to establish him as a Christ figure is unparalleled. Based on the current rate of progress, those working to deify their Messiah in the global consciousness expect to reach critical mass much faster than it took Jesus' followers. Over time, Paul's media-driven veneration will include faith-promoting mystical stories, convincing the world that Paul is the true avatar of this Aeon of Horus, will confirm the validity of Crowley's prophecies. Vindicating Crowley as a true prophet empowers those holding the reins of Paulism, just as Christianity empowered the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire. Paulism is one branch of a larger tree that will create the illusion of choice, each being free to choose his or her own branch, but with all of the options being controlled by the same trunk of people who also control politics and wealth in the New World Order. Upon William's death, the illuminated will eulogize, quote-unquote, Paul as the god of music. The profane will hear the epithet, but understand it metaphorically as with Elvis, the king of rock, or Michael, the king of pop. After the massive depopulation, a generation of literalists will emerge. They will turn against their unbelieving parents, compared to Luke chapter 12, verses 51 through 53, to proclaim Paul's divinity. Paul will be recognized as the Messiah, with Aleister Crowley as his prophet. Dissenters will call Paul an antichrist, not in the sense of opposing Jesus, but for replacing him. Crowley opposers will say, is a false prophet. Most devotees will say that Paul, who is Krishna, was born a god, an incarnation of Vishnu, and that he lived to a ripe old age. Others will say he was born mortal, but obtained a fullness of divinity by degrees as he grew in light and knowledge. The illuminated will secretly pass on the great mystery that Paul embodied gods that continued in William, reenacting Osiris and Horus. Such quote-unquote William mythology will offend those who feel it diminishes Paul's independent divinity. However, the same stories will inspire, quote-unquote, the elect. That totally makes me think of, the channel out there in the YouTube land that seeks justice for Paul McCartney. They're going to be the ones that will feel that it diminishes Paul's independent divinity, right? Oh, it's just kind of funny. Okay, and then just real quick, guys, on page 559, I wanted to um, quickly go over this little bit. The emboldened words on this page: I believe in how. I am the beetle lord. Everyone says the beetle lord could not be the possessing entity that we think. And the beetle lord, totally, that's what they called Capri, guys. They called Capri the beetle god, you know. Ooh, Capri's coming out in all places, right? Anyways, okay. Just a couple more, guys. Okay, so we go to page 563. So 5 plus 6 plus 3, you get 14. 1 plus 4 equals 5 again. 5 being the number of major change, truth or justice, adaptability. All right, so let's see the footnote here. Comparing Christ to him crucified with Paul and him decapitated is not only absurd based on the Christ consciousness being astronomically beyond Paul's, but also because it is not how Paul died. Although Paul's head was quote-unquote wounded to death, that's from Revelation chapter 13, verse 3, that death did not occur by decapitation. If the head were fully removed, that would have happened later. Nevertheless, just as Christians celebrate the crucifixion, Paulists celebrate Paul's soul's transmigration. The idea in Pauline Christianity that Jesus was sacrificed for all to be resurrected is not based on teachings of Jesus, but on the mythos of various religions around the world. By Paul and others aligning details of Jesus with older stories, it was easier to graft in a much wider audience along with their doctrines, rituals, and holidays. Very little quote-unquote Christianity originated with Jesus. Now, as always, Christians regularly press their own agendas by attributing them to Jesus, even if it contradicts what Jesus taught. Although Jesus said, while, quote unquote, love your enemies in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, Christian soldiers in the Crusades killed while believing it was in the service of Jesus. Although he says, quote, judge not that ye be not judged, unquote, chapter 7, verse 1. And even though he never singled out the gays one way or another, some Christians, as if speaking for Jesus, persecutes gays. So it will be with Paulism. In the coming centuries, agendas will be pushed in Paul's name, whether or not they happen to align with Paul personally. Oh, yes, the doctrines of hypocrisy, right? Yes, and you know, that's something that I I do agree with. I consider myself a Christian, but I consider myself a Christian who follows the words of Jesus and the instructions of Jesus and the covenant of Jesus that, you know, come from the Bible, come from his mouth. That's what I believe personally, and I do agree with that. I think that the name of God has been warped and twisted and, you know, shaped into this horrible weapon that is used to brainwash the masses, you know, with making them think that what they're thinking and believing is correct. You know, it's what the Catholics do. The Catholics don't like to let their congregation read the Bible. Still to this day, they have their own Bible that's their own list of 10 commandments. You know, it's highly edited, and it's highly centered around the fallible man, and yeah. Anyways, I do digress there. All right, so the very last footnote I want to look at, guys, is on page 597. Okay, so let's look at the numerology first. 5 plus 9 plus 7 is 21. 2 plus 1 equals 3. Again, the perfect number. Wisdom, harmony. A lot of cycles happen in threes. Let's look at the emboldened words on this page. I prefer happiness as I appreciate the ideas. What best serves me about Aleister Crowley is the influential network. So basically that web enlisted by the Committee of 300 was the long road on which to drive the beetle vehicle carrying the New World message. Networking in Father Crowley's camp gave us power in this world. As for teachings, notice that I also quote from Jesus, Confucius, and many others. Since I believe that we can learn from everyone, I do not mind quoting anyone. Whether the messenger is a devil or an angel, it's mostly up to you. Check out the footnote. Intentionally acquiring a satanic nature is absurd since it opposes peace and happiness. Quote unquote Satan, and I can't pronounce the Hebrew there, means adversary or accuser. In this upside down world, some who express the greatest hatred for Satan may be the most satanic, the most inclined to adversarial positions of accusing others. Hence, they are angry, refusing the peace of understanding. The opposite of Lucifer, the morning star, is Vesper, the evening star. One heralds the light of day, the other the darkness of night. To Luciferians, it is blasphemous to say Satan to mean Lucifer. However, rather than being offended by that error, most recognize it coming from a Christian perspective. Satan and Lucifer are as similar in meaning as black and white. And yet, the same being has both attributes just as we all do. By accepting the totality of ourselves and others, our wholeness allows our opposite aspects to work as one, like a black and white chessboard, a Masonic symbol. Resisting our darkness strengthens it by trapping energy there. Accepting ourselves without judging our dark shadow frees us to choose either light or darkness. The global elite seek both, having the contradictory belief that they can be adversarial, satanic, to opponents, but the illuminated or Luciferian personally. It is as inconsistent as accusers, satanic, seeking the Holy Spirit. Peace. Oh, always flip-flopping the opposites, aren't you, Mr. William? Yeah, so those are just a few of the notes. I did mostly read most of the footnotes from the PAULISM chapter. I just find it very, very interesting. You can definitely see that, just like they said in one of the footnotes, that so Paulism is just another branch of the Luciferian philosophy, religion, cult, whatever. It's another sect, all ran by the same principles, basically. That's how I view, personally, politics. The Republicans and the Democrats are the right and left hands or legs of a bigger machine. You know, they're the ones that take action for the controllers behind the curtains, right? And that's not crazy conspiracy theory either. I think anybody with half a brain and anybody who pays attention to history can see that plain. Again, you have the red versus the blue, right? The red lodge versus the blue. But when you merge, you get purple, and purple is royalty. You know, it is the alchemy of the wholeness of something. That is the core principle of Luciferianism. That is the core principle of Paulism, is working on all aspects of yourself and focusing one's attention in a sort of globally conscious way, or cosmically conscious with me, right? The cosmic consciousness, the cosmic universal fire that the fireman talks about, right? Woo, it all comes together, and it all comes from the same source. Yeah. So, I think it's really fascinating. You can see that, you know, putting Paul and Billy in these positions, you know, that's why Billy is our gold-winged scarab. You know, he's gold because of the alchemical process that brought him and Paul, together as one whole being, right? It's all alchemy. It's solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate, become one, become whole. And so, you know, he is the gold-winged scarab beetle because what is supposed to come from mixing two base materials in the alchemical process? Gold, right? So, yeah, you know, it all ties in to the same principles, these same ideologies, the same cosmically consciousness and ideas that are all encompassing in this push for this new world, right? Pretty crazy, guys. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight these footnotes and kind of, you know, go over what Luciferianism as a philosophy is. And you can see how it ties into the whole Paulism and the whole Osiris-Horus myth. It is alchemy at its finest, the merging of opposites. That is what the number 6 represents in the hexagon, the merging of opposites. And that is what William says his number is, the number that represents him, number 6. So with that, guys, I am done. And thank you so much if you're here at the very end with me. I appreciate your time and attention as always. And I will see you guys in the next video. Have a wonderful, safe, and blessed week. Bye, guys.
I looked into the sky. Everything was high, higher than it seemed to be to me. Standing by the sea, thinking I was the heart.